Let me tell you about a man who thought money could solve everything. He hired a housekeeper for just $15 an hour to help care for his paralyzed daughter. But here's the thing, he didn't trust anyone. So he installed hidden cameras all over his house, watching them in secret, thinking he was protecting his child. Then one night, something happened. He sat there in his office, staring at those camera screens, and what he saw made him break down and cry. For the first time in 4 years, this wealthy, powerful man actually cried, because that housekeeper, the woman making $15 an hour, she gave his daughter something all his millions never could. Stay with me, because this story will show you that sometimes the most powerful kind of hope comes from the most unexpected places. Welcome to Radiant Story and Tales. While you are here, please hit the subscribe button and comment your view on the story and where you are watching from. Let me tell you about a man named Richard Thompson. He wasn't just rich, he was the kind of wealthy that most people only see in movies. His house sat on a hill overlooking the city, with windows so tall you could see 3 neighborhoods from the living room. But all that money, all that success, it couldn't protect him from the one thing that shattered his world. 4 years ago, Richard's daughter, 10-year-old Lily, was crossing the street on her way home from school. The crossing guard was there. The light was green for pedestrians. Everything should have been safe. But a delivery truck driver, rushing to make his quota, didn't see the red light. Or maybe he saw it and thought he could make it through. Either way, in one terrible moment, everything changed. Lily survived, but the injuries to her spine meant she would never walk again. From that day forward, her legs, which had carried her through dance recitals and soccer games, would remain still. And Richard, the man who had built an empire through planning and precision, learned the hardest lesson of his life. Money could buy the best doctors, the finest wheelchair, the most advanced equipment, but it couldn't turn back time. It couldn't heal what was broken. The accident changed Richard in ways that crept up slowly. At first, he threw himself into finding solutions, flying Lily to specialists across the country, researching experimental treatments, anything that might help. But as the months passed and the reality settled in, something darker took root in his heart. Fear, deep consuming fear. Not fear of losing his money or his business. Fear of losing his daughter to carelessness, to cruelty, to the casual indifference of people who saw her wheelchair before they saw her. You see, when you have a child who needs help with everything, you have to let strangers into your life. Physical therapists who stretch her legs each morning. Nurses who help with her medication. Tutors who come for homeschooling. Housekeepers who clean around her. And Richard learned, painfully, that not everyone treated Lily with the gentleness she deserved. There was a therapist who grew impatient when Lily cried during a painful exercise, snapping at her to toughen up. The nurse who roughly pulled her arm while helping her dress, leaving bruises. The housekeeper who spoke about Lily as if she wasn't in the room, calling her the poor thing, with a voice dripping with pity. Each incident felt like another wound. So Richard made a decision. He would install cameras throughout the house. Small ones, hidden in corners and behind picture frames, tucked into the spines of books on shelves. He told himself it was just to keep Lily safe, to make sure no one mistreated her when he wasn't there. He didn't tell anyone about the cameras. Not the staff, not even Lily. They were his secret insurance policy, his way of maintaining control in a world that had proven itself capable of terrible randomness. The cameras fed into monitors in his home office, a room where Richard spent most of his evenings after work. But here's the thing, he almost never watched them. The feed sat there, recording everything, but Richard couldn't bring himself to look, because watching his daughter's daily life through a screen, seeing her struggle to do things that used to come so easily, it hurt too much. It was like pressing on a bruise that never healed. So the cameras watched, and Richard looked away, and everyone went about their business, unaware they were being observed. When the previous housekeeper quit, citing the emotional toll of the job, Richard barely reacted. People came and went. That was just how it was. He placed an advertisement, conducted interviews, and hired someone new. Her name was Rose Patterson. She was probably in her late 30s, though she had one of those faces that could be younger or older depending on the light. During the interview, She sat with her hands folded in her lap, not fidgeting, not trying to impress him with elaborate promises. Her resume was ordinary. Previous housekeeping jobs, decent references, nothing spectacular. She didn't gasp at the size of the house or comment on the expensive art on the walls. She listened when Richard explained Lily's needs, the schedule, the routines that had to be followed. And at the end, she asked just one question. Does Lily like stories? Richard paused. It seemed like such a small thing to ask, not about pay or time off or duties, but about whether his daughter liked stories. He answered yes, vaguely, and hired her on the spot, mainly because he was tired and needed someone to start soon. Rose began work the following Monday, and for the first week, everything was unremarkable. She cleaned the house efficiently, prepared simple meals according to the dietary plan Richard had provided, and followed Lily's schedule exactly. Richard, buried in conference calls and business deals, barely saw her. He would leave early, come home late, and occasionally pass her in the hallway with a brief nod. But something was different. He noticed it in small ways. Lily, who had grown quiet and withdrawn over the past year, started talking more at dinner. Not a lot, but more than before. She mentioned things Rose had said, questions Rose had asked her. There was a lightness in her voice that Richard hadn't heard in a long time. He told himself it was good that Lily seemed more comfortable, but he didn't investigate further. He was afraid to hope, afraid that if he looked too closely, whatever fragile improvement he sensed might disappear. The cameras continued recording, silent witnesses to a house that was slowly, imperceptibly beginning to change. 3 weeks after Rose started working in the house, Richard came home early from a business trip that had been cut short. It was a Wednesday afternoon, and the house was quiet in that particular way. That meant Lily was probably in her room, and Rose was somewhere cleaning. Richard went to his office, loosened his tie, and sat down at his desk. He was exhausted, but not the kind of tired that sleep could fix. It was a deeper weariness, the kind that comes from carrying worry for so long that it becomes part of you. His eyes drifted to the monitors on the side wall, the screens that showed feeds from the cameras throughout the house. He couldn't remember the last time he'd actually looked at them. Months, maybe, but something in him, some instinct or curiosity, or maybe just a need for distraction, made him reach for the mouse and click through the feeds. The kitchen was empty. The living room, too. He switched to Lily's bedroom, and there they were, Rose and Lily. And what Richard saw made him lean closer to the screen, his breath catching in his throat. Rose was sitting on the floor, not on a chair, not standing while she worked, but sitting cross-legged on the carpet beside Lily's wheelchair. She wasn't doing anything, not folding laundry, not organizing the room, not even talking. She was just sitting there, her eyes closed, breathing slowly, and Lily, in her wheelchair, was doing the same thing. Their chests rose and fell in the same rhythm, like two people finding the same quiet space together. Richard watched, confused. What were they doing? It looked like nothing, but it didn't feel like nothing. There was something intentional about it, something careful. After what must have been 2 or 3 minutes, Rose opened her eyes and said something. Richard couldn't hear it clearly through the speaker. The audio on these cameras was decent, but not perfect. But he saw Lily's shoulders, which were usually hunched and tense, slowly relax and drop. Then Rose did something strange. She began tapping her fingers on the floor. Not random tapping, but a pattern, a rhythm. Tap, tap, pause, tap, tap, tap. Gentle, almost musical. She reached into her pocket and pulled out 2 wooden spoons, the kind you use for cooking, and handed them to Lily. Lily looked confused, holding the spoons awkwardly. But Rose kept tapping, kept smiling, and after a moment, Lily tapped the spoons together, clumsily at first, not matching the rhythm. But Rose didn't correct her. She just adjusted her own tapping to meet Lily where she was, and slowly, incredibly, they found a rhythm together, back and forth, floor and spoons, like a conversation without words. And then Lily laughed, a real laugh, bright and surprised, the kind of sound that bursts out before you can stop it. Richard felt his chest tighten. When was the last time he'd heard his daughter laugh like that? Not a polite chuckle or a half-smile, but genuine joy. He watched Rose's face on the screen. She wasn't performing. This wasn't the practiced cheerfulness of someone doing a job. This was real. She looked at Lily the way you look at someone you actually see, someone who matters. Richard switched to another camera, this one showing the hallway outside Lily's room from later that same day, according to the timestamp. Rose was pushing Lily's wheelchair, but she was talking to her like an equal, not like a child or a patient. He couldn't make out every word, but he caught fragments. What do you think the main character should have done differently? Lily's voice thoughtful. Maybe she should have trusted her friend more. That's smart. Why do you think she didn't? They disappeared around a corner, their voices fading. Richard sat back in his chair, something shifting inside him. Over the next several days, he found himself watching the feeds more often. Not constantly, but in moments between meetings, late at night when he couldn't sleep. He told himself he was just checking to make sure everything was all right. But that wasn't the whole truth. He was watching because what he saw confused him, moved him, and challenged everything he thought he knew about caring for his daughter. He saw Rose reading to Lily, but not from children's books. She read adventure novels, mysteries, stories with complex plots, and she stopped frequently to ask Lily's opinion, treating her thoughts as valuable rather than cute. He saw her helping Lily with physical exercises that the therapist had prescribed, but she turned them into games, celebrating each small effort rather than demanding results. One evening, he watched as Rose carefully brushed Lily's hair, taking her time, not rushing through it like a chore. She braided it in an intricate pattern, and when she was done, she held up a mirror so Lily could see. "You look like a warrior princess," Rose said, and Lily, who rarely smiled anymore, beamed. But the moment that changed everything came late on a Friday night. Richard was in his office, exhausted from a 14-hour day, mindlessly clicking through the feeds. The timestamp showed it was past 10 o'clock. Lily should have been asleep, but the camera in the living room showed her in her wheelchair, and she was crying, not quiet tears. Deep, wrenching sobs that shook her whole body. Her hands were clenched into fists, her face contorted with an anguish that Richard recognized because he'd felt it himself but never allowed himself to show. And through the speakers, he heard her words, broken and raw. "I hate this chair. I hate being stuck. I hate that I can't do anything." Richard's first instinct was to run downstairs, to hold his daughter, to tell her it would be okay. But his hand froze on the doorknob because Rose appeared on the screen, and something made him wait. Rose knelt down in front of Lily, her face level with the girl's, and she didn't do what Richard expected. She didn't say, "Don't talk like that," or "You have so much to be grateful for," or any of the meaningless comfort people usually offer. She just said very quietly, "I know." Those two words hung in the air. And then Rose did something that Richard would never forget. Rose reached out and gently took Lily's clenched fists in her hands, opening them slowly, carefully, like you might handle something precious and fragile. She placed Lily's palms on her own legs, just above her knees. And she said, "Tell me what you miss most." Lily's voice was barely a whisper, choked with tears. "Running. I miss running." Richard watched through the screen, his own eyes burning. He'd never asked his daughter this question. He'd been too afraid of the answer, too afraid of acknowledging the depth of what she'd lost because acknowledging it meant facing his own helplessness. Rose nodded, still holding Lily's hands against her legs. "Okay," she said softly. "Then feel this." And she began to walk in place, very slowly, right there in front of Lily's wheelchair. But she didn't just walk. She narrated every single sensation. "Feel my muscles tightening just before I lift my foot," she said. "That's the moment of decision. Your brain says move, and your body answers. Can you feel it?" Lily nodded, her crying quieting as she focused on the movement beneath her palms. Rose continued, lifting one knee, then the other, describing everything. Now there's a shift in weight, the balance changing from one side to the other. It's like a conversation between your left and right side, back and forth, a rhythm. She moved Lily's hands to different parts of her legs as she spoke. "Here's where the power comes from, the push-off. And here's where you land, where you absorb the impact and get ready for the next step. She walked in place for maybe 2 minutes, maybe more, narrating the entire experience as if she was translating a language Lily had forgotten how to speak. And then she stopped, kneeling back down, still holding Lily's hands. "Your body remembers all of this," Rose said, her voice firm but kind. "Just because your legs can't do it right now doesn't mean the memory is gone. It's still in you, Lily. The feeling, the knowledge, the strength. And we're going to remind your body of what it knows. Not tomorrow, not all at once, but we'll remind it together every day in whatever way we can. Different doesn't mean gone. Do you understand?" Lily was staring at Rose, her tears drying on her cheeks, something like wonder in her eyes. She nodded slowly. "Different doesn't mean gone," she repeated, testing the words. "Exactly," Rose said. "You're not less than you were. You're just different. And different can be powerful if we let it." They sat there together for a while longer, Rose's arms around Lily now, the girl's head resting against her shoulder. No more words, just presence, just being together in the pain and the hope and reality of it all. Richard sat in his office, his face in his hands, shoulders shaking. He realized he was crying for the first time since the accident. Not tears of grief, though grief was part of it, but tears of recognition. For 4 years, he had tried to protect his daughter by controlling everything around her. The best medical care, the most expensive equipment, the surveillance cameras to catch anyone who might hurt her. But in all that protection, he had forgotten to give her the one thing she needed most. Hope. Not false hope. Not the empty promise that everything would go back to the way it was. But real hope, the kind that says you can have a future even when that future looks different than what you planned. The kind that says you are still whole, still worthy, still capable of joy. And Rose, a woman he barely knew, a housekeeper he'd hired with hardly a thought, had given his daughter that gift, not because she was paid to, not because it was in her job description, but because she saw Lily, really saw her, and responded with genuine compassion. Richard didn't sleep that night. He sat in his office, the camera feeds playing on the screens, but he wasn't really watching anymore. He was thinking about what kind of father he had become, the kind who had cameras to catch people being cruel, but who had been too afraid to sit with his own daughter in her pain, the kind who could buy anything except the courage to be vulnerable. By the time the sun rose, Richard had made a decision. He would talk to Rose. He would tell her the truth about the cameras, face whatever judgment she might have, and ask her to forgive him for watching her without her knowledge. It was the right thing to do, even if it meant she might quit, even if it meant facing his own shame. At 8 o'clock that morning, he called Rose into his office. She came promptly, as she always did, her expression calm and professional. She stood in front of his desk, hands folded, waiting. Richard realized he had no idea how to begin. How do you confess something like this? How do you admit you've been secretly watching someone? He took a breath and decided on honesty. Simple, direct honesty. "Rose, I need to tell you something, and I'm not proud of it." Her expression didn't change, but she seemed to be listening carefully. "There are cameras throughout this house. Hidden cameras. I installed them years ago, after Lily's accident, because I was afraid that the people caring for her might hurt her when I wasn't looking. I never told anyone about them." He paused, watching for her reaction. She remained still, processing. He continued, "I haven't watched them much over the years. It hurt too much to see Lily's daily struggles. But recently I did watch, and I saw you with her." Now Rose's expression shifted slightly, something unreadable crossing her face. Richard pressed on. "I saw what you did last night, how you helped her when she was crying, how you talked to her, really talked to her. Not like she's broken or pitiful, but like she's a person who deserves respect and honesty. I saw how you've been with her these past weeks, and I realized something." His voice cracked slightly. "All my money, all my cameras, all my attempt to control everything, they kept her safe from harm. But they didn't give her what you've given her. They didn't give her hope. And I'm grateful for that. More grateful than I can say. But I'm also ashamed that I watched you without your knowledge, and I'm sorry." The silence that followed felt endless. Rose stood there, her face thoughtful, and Richard braced himself for anger or betrayal or resignation. But when she finally spoke, her voice was steady and surprisingly gentle. "Mr. Thompson," she said, "I'm glad you saw what happened last night." Richard looked up, startled. "I'm glad," she continued, "because maybe now you can see what I see when I look at Lily. Not a tragedy, not someone to be pitied, but a brave, intelligent, beautiful girl who's dealing with something incredibly hard. She doesn't need someone to fix her. She needs someone to believe in her." Rose took a small step forward. "The cameras don't bother me. I understand why you installed them. But can I ask you something?" Richard nodded. "When you watch those feeds, do you see your daughter or do you see the accident?" The question hit Richard like a physical blow. He opened his mouth to answer, but found he couldn't. Because the truth was, for so long, when he looked at Lily, all he saw was what happened that terrible day. The before and after. What was lost. Rose's question hung in the air between them, and Richard felt the weight of it settle onto his shoulders. "I see the accident," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Every time I look at her, I see that day. I see the call from the hospital, the surgery, the doctors telling me she'd never walk again. I see the girl she was before, and I see everything that was taken from her." He looked up at Rose, his eyes red. "How do I stop seeing that? How do I look at my daughter and just see her?" Rose was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke, there was a sadness in her voice, but also a kindness. "Mr. Thompson, can I tell you something about myself?" Richard nodded. Rose moved to sit in one of the chairs across from his desk, and for the first time, she seemed less like an employee and more like someone offering counsel. 10 years ago," she began, "I had a son. His name was Daniel, and he was 6 years old." He had this laugh that sounded like bubbles popping, if that makes any sense. Everything delighted him. Birds, rain, the way shadows moved across walls. He saw magic in ordinary things. Her voice remained steady, but Richard could hear the grief underneath it. Old and familiar. One winter, he got sick. It seemed like a normal cold at first, but it wasn't. It was meningitis. And by the time we got into the hospital, it had already done its damage. He died 3 days later. Rose folded her hands in her lap, looking down at them. For years after that, I couldn't look at children without seeing Daniel. Couldn't hear a child laugh without remembering his laugh. Every child I saw was just a reminder of what I'd lost. Richard felt his throat tighten. "I'm so sorry." Rose looked up at him, and her eyes were clear. "Thank you. But here's what I learned, Mr. Thompson. Grief has a way of making us blind to the present because we're so focused on the past. I could have spent the rest of my life seeing every child as a ghost of my son, but that wouldn't have honored Daniel's memory. It would have just kept me trapped." She leaned forward slightly. "Your daughter didn't die in that accident. I know it feels like you lost her, like you lost the future you imagined for her. But Lily is still here, Mr. Thompson. She's alive and growing and becoming someone. Maybe not the someone you thought she'd be, but someone nonetheless. And every day that you look at her and only see loss, you miss who she actually is." Richard felt tears sliding down his face, but he didn't wipe them away. "I don't know how to let go of that day," he said. "I don't know how to forgive myself for not protecting her. You can't protect anyone from everything," Rose said gently. "That's the hardest truth of being a parent. You can love them with everything you have, do everything right, and terrible things can still happen. The accident wasn't your fault. But if you spend the rest of Lily's childhood hiding behind cameras and guilt, if you never really show up for who she is now, that will be a choice. And that's something you'll have to live with." The words weren't harsh, but they landed with force. Richard realized that Rose was offering him something rare and precious, honesty wrapped in compassion. She wasn't condemning him, but she wasn't letting him hide either. "I want to show up," Richard said finally. "I want to be the father she needs. But I don't know how. You seem to know exactly what to say to her, how to help her, and I just feel lost." Rose smiled slightly. "I don't have any special knowledge, Mr. Thompson. I just listen to her, really listen, and I don't bring my own fear into the room. When I'm with Lily, I'm not thinking about what she can't do or what might go wrong. I'm just present with who she is right now, in this moment. She stood up, smoothing her skirt. You asked me earlier if there was anything you could do to thank me. You offered me a raise, better benefits. But that's not what I want. Richard looked at her, waiting. What I want is for you to spend time with your daughter. Real time, not checking in on her schedule or making sure she took her medicine, but actually being with her. Play a game with her. Ask her what she's thinking about. Let her see you, not just a worried father, but you, the person you are underneath all the fear. Richard felt a lump in his throat. What if I don't know who that person is anymore? Then you'll figure out together. Rose said simply. That's what family does. After Rose left the office, Richard sat alone for a long time. Her words echoed in his mind, challenging assumptions he'd carried for years. He thought about the cameras, those silent witnesses he'd installed to keep Lily safe. But safe from what? From careless caregivers. Yes. But also, if he was honest, from his own inability to be present with her pain. The cameras had been a shield, a way to care without actually having to be there, to protect without actually having to engage. And in the process, he created distance between himself and the daughter he loved more than anything. That evening, Richard did something he hadn't done in months. Instead of working through dinner, instead of eating alone in his office while going through emails, he asked Rose to set the table in the dining room for two. When Lily came in, wheeled by Rose, she looked surprised. Dad, are you eating with me? If that's okay with you, Richard said, and he was surprised by how nervous he felt. This was his daughter, his own child, and yet sitting across from her felt like meeting someone for the first time. They ate in silence for a few minutes, the clink of silverware the only sound. Then Richard took a breath and asked, What are you reading these days? Lily looked up, surprised. Rose has been reading me this book about a girl who solves mysteries in her neighborhood. It's really good. Tell me about it, Richard said. And as Lily began to describe the plot, her eyes lighting up as she talked about the clever protagonist and the twist in the story, Richard realized something. He had no idea his daughter liked mysteries. He'd been so focused on her medical needs, her physical therapy schedule, her limitations, that he'd never thought to ask about her interests, her thoughts, the life of her mind. Over the next weeks, something shifted in the Thompson house. Richard started coming home earlier. He began eating dinner with Lily regularly, and those dinners stretched longer as they discovered things about each other. Lily loved puzzles and had a talent for spotting patterns. She was fascinated by astronomy and could name constellations Richard had never heard of. She had a dry sense of humor that caught him off guard and made him laugh. Richard also started joining the physical therapy sessions, not to supervise, but to participate. Rose had been right when she said different doesn't mean gone. Lily couldn't walk, but there were exercises that kept her muscles strong, that improved her core stability, that gave her more independence in her wheelchair. And when Richard stopped seeing these sessions as reminders of what she'd lost and started seeing them as Lily becoming stronger in her own way, everything changed. One Saturday afternoon, Richard found Lily and Rose in the living room with those wooden spoons again, tapping out rhythms on various surfaces. Can I join? He asked hesitantly. Lily grinned. Only if you can keep up. Richard grabbed a spoon and tried to match their rhythm. He was terrible at it, completely offbeat, and they all ended up laughing. It was messy and imperfect and absolutely perfect. 3 months after that conversation in his office, Richard made another decision. He had the cameras removed. All of them. He called a technician, had them dismantled and taken away. And when the house was finally free of those hidden eyes, he felt lighter. Not because he didn't care about Lily's safety, but because he realized that real safety wasn't about surveillance. It was about trust and presence and building a life where Lily felt secure not because she was being watched, but because she was being loved. Rose noticed, of course. She didn't say anything, but Richard caught her slight nod of approval when she walked past a shelf where a camera used to be hidden. That nod meant more to him than any words could have. But the biggest change came from Lily herself. With Rose's encouragement and Richard's new presence in her life, Lily started advocating for herself in ways she never had before. She told her physical therapist when an exercise hurt too much and needed to be modified. She asked her tutor to challenge her with harder material because she was bored. She started expressing opinions about her own care, her own life, rather than passively accepting what others decided for her. One evening at dinner, Lily said something that made Richard put down his fork. "Dad, I've been thinking, I want to try adaptive sports. Rose told me about wheelchair basketball, and I want to see if there's a team I can join." Richard's first instinct was fear. What if she got hurt? What if it was too much for her? But he looked at his daughter's face, at the determination and hope in her eyes, and he thought about Rose's words. "You can't protect anyone from everything. Let's research teams together," he said. "We'll find the right one." Lily's smile was worth every moment of fear he had to push through. They found a local adaptive sports program, and Richard drove Lily to her first practice. He sat in the stands, watching his daughter navigate the court in her wheelchair, learning to dribble and pass, laughing when she missed a shot, cheering when her teammates scored. She was part of a team, part of something bigger than her injury. And Richard realized something profound. For years, he thought love meant protecting Lily from anything that might hurt her. But real love meant supporting her as she took risks, as she tried new things, as she built a life on her own terms. Real love meant trusting her to know what she needed. Rose continued working in the house, but the dynamic had changed. She was no longer just an employee. She was family in all the ways that mattered. She joined them for dinner sometimes, sharing stories from her day, laughing at Richard's terrible jokes, celebrating Lily's small victories like they were her own. One Sunday afternoon, Richard found Rose and Lily in the garden. Rose had set up an easel and was teaching Lily to paint. Lily's wheelchair was positioned in front of the canvas, and she was concentrating hard, her brush moving in careful strokes. Rose stood beside her, offering gentle guidance, but mostly just watching with that same expression of authentic care that Richard had first seen on the camera feeds months ago. Richard stood in the doorway, watching them, but this time he wasn't watching through a screen. He was present, part of the moment, part of the life unfolding in front of him, and he thought about how close he'd come to missing all of this, how close he'd come to spending Lily's entire childhood behind a wall of fear and control, watching life happen on monitors instead of living it. "Dad, come see," Lily called out, noticing him. He walked over, and she pointed to her canvas. It was abstract, swirls of blue and gold, and it was beautiful. "Rose says I have an eye for color." "It's wonderful," Richard said, and he meant it. Not because it was perfect, but because it was Lily's, because it was her creating something, expressing herself, being more than her diagnosis or her limitations. That night, after Lily had gone to bed, Richard sat with Rose in the kitchen over cups of tea. "I never thanked you properly," he said, "for what you've done for Lily, for what you've done for our family." Rose shook her head. "You don't need to thank me, Mr. Thompson. Lily did the work. You did the work. I just helped you both see what was already there." "Still," Richard insisted, "you changed our lives. You gave us hope when I didn't think hope was possible." Rose was quiet for a moment, looking into her tea. "Can I tell you something? When I lost Daniel, I thought I'd never feel purposeful again. I thought the best parts of me died with him. But being here, helping Lily, watching her grow and become brave, it's healed something in me too. So maybe we've all been giving each other hope. Maybe that's how it works." Richard felt tears prick his eyes, but they were different than the tears he'd shed before. These were tears of gratitude, of recognition, of finally understanding what it meant to be part of something bigger than his own pain. "Maybe that is how it works," he agreed. Months turned into a year, and the Thompson house continued to transform. Lily joined the wheelchair basketball team and discovered she loved the competitive energy of sports. She made friends, real friends who saw her for who she was, not what had happened to her. She started talking about the future, about wanting to study astronomy in college, about traveling to see the Northern Lights someday. And Richard learned to dream again, too. Not the dreams he'd had before the accident, the ones that involved Lily dancing at her wedding or running marathons. But new dreams, One that included wheelchair-accessible travel, adaptive equipment that would let Lily explore the world, a future built on who she actually was rather than who he'd once imagined she'd be. Rose remained a constant presence, but as time went on, she gently encouraged Richard and Lily to build their relationship independent of her. She took weekends off, encouraged Richard to handle more of Lily's daily routines, stepped back in ways that said, "You've got this now." One evening, almost 2 years after Rose had first started working for them, she sat Richard and Lily down in the living room. "I have something to tell you both," she said, and Richard felt his stomach drop. He knew what was coming. "I've been offered a position managing a care program for children with disabilities. It's something I've been wanting to do for a long time, a way to help more families like yours." Lily's face fell. "You're leaving?" "Not leaving you," Rose said quickly, taking Lily's hand. "Never leaving you in any way that matters. But yes, I'll be moving on from this job. It's time." Richard felt the loss acutely, but he also felt something else: pride, gratitude, and the knowledge that Rose had given them something permanent, something that would outlast their physical presence in their house. She'd taught them how to be a family again. "You'll visit, though?" Lily asked, her voice small. "Try to stop me," Rose said, smiling. "I'll want to hear about every basketball game, every painting, everything. You're stuck with me, just in a different way." On Rose's last day of work, Richard gave her a letter, not a reference, though he'd already written her a glowing one for her new position. This was something more personal. In it, he wrote about what her presence had meant, how she'd saved not just Lily but him too, how she taught him that the greatest act of love was showing up, being present, seeing people as they truly are. He also wrote about the cameras, about how removing them had been one of the best decisions he'd ever made. Because life wasn't meant to be observed from a safe distance. It was meant to be lived, with all its risks and messiness and beautiful uncertainty. Rose read the letter in her car before driving away, and later she told Richard that she cried all the way home. But they were good tears, the kind that come when you realize you made a real difference in the world. Years later, Richard would look back on this period of his life as a time when he finally learned what it meant to be a father, not a protector hiding behind technology and money, not a controller trying to prevent every possible hurt, but a person who showed up, who listened, who was brave enough to be present even when it hurt. Lily went on to do remarkable things. She graduated high school with honors, her wheelchair decorated with consolation stickers and basketball team pins. She got accepted to university to study astrophysics, and Richard helped her move into an accessible dorm room, his heart both breaking and soaring as he watched her wheel herself into this new chapter of independence. She never did walk again, but she learned to see that as just one fact about her life, not the defining fact. She became a fierce advocate for accessibility, speaking at schools about what it meant to live with a disability. She fell in love, had her heart broken, fell in love again. She traveled to Iceland and saw the northern lights. Just like she dreamed, the green ribbons of light dancing above her as she sat bundled in her wheelchair, tears of joy streaming down her face. And through it all, Rose stayed in their lives. She came to Lily's high school graduation, to her basketball championships, to the small dinner parties Richard threw. We finally learned how to cook something other than toast. She became Lily's fiercest cheerleader and Richard's trusted friend, the person who had seen him at their lowest and loved them anyway. Richard never installed cameras again. He learned to trust, to let go, to accept that love meant being vulnerable to loss and pain and heartbreak. He learned that the best way to protect someone you love isn't to control their environment, but to give them the tools and confidence to navigate the world themselves. On Lily's 21st birthday, Richard took her to dinner at her favorite restaurant. Over dessert, she looked at him with those eyes that still held traces of the 10-year-old girl who'd been hurt, but also held the strength of the woman she'd become. "Dad," she said, "I never told you this, but I know about the cameras." Richard's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. "What?" "Rose told me years ago. She thought I should know." Lily smiled softly. "I wasn't angry. I understood why you did it. You were scared. You'd already lost so much that day, and you didn't want to lose anything else." Richard felt his throat tighten. "Lily, I'm so sorry. I should have—" "Stop," she said gently, reaching across the table to take his hand. "You don't need to apologize anymore. You already showed me you changed. You showed me every day for years. The cameras don't matter. What matters is that you learn to see me. Really see me. Not the girl in the wheelchair, not the daughter who got hurt, but me, Lily, the person I actually am." She squeezed his hand. "And you know what? I'm proud of who I am. I'm proud of what we've been through together. The accident was the worst thing that ever happened to me, but it also led to some of the best things. It led to Rose. It led to you becoming the dad I needed. It led to me discovering strengths I never knew I had." Richard was crying now, not bothering to hide it. "You're the bravest person I know," he said, "and I'm so grateful I get to be your father." "Different doesn't mean gone," Lily said, echoing the words Rose had spoken to her all those years ago. "You taught me that. Well, Rose taught me first, but you learned it too, and that's what matters." They sat there together, father and daughter, surrounded by the noise of the restaurant, but existing in their own quiet moment of understanding. And Richard thought about all the years that had passed since that terrible day when everything changed. All the fear he'd carried, all the control he'd tried to maintain, all the cameras that had watched but never truly seen. And he thought about what he had now: a daughter who was strong and independent and kind, a relationship built on presence and trust rather than surveillance and fear, a life that looked nothing like what he'd planned but was somehow more beautiful because of it. That night, driving Lily back to her apartment, Richard realized something. The story he'd been telling himself for years, the story of the day everything was taken away, had been the wrong story all along. The real story was about what was found: hope in the darkest moments, connection when he'd isolated himself, love that grew deeper through honesty and vulnerability. And it all started with a woman named Rose, who asked one simple question during an interview: "Does Lily like stories?" Because Rose understood something Richard had forgotten, that everyone has a story, and the most important thing we can do is listen to it, honor it, and help others write the next chapter. The cameras are long gone now. The mansion on the hill no longer holds secrets in its corners. Instead, it holds laughter and music and the sound of life being fully lived. Richard learned that you can't protect the people you love from pain, but you can stand beside them in it. You can believe in them. You can show up again and again with an open heart. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, someone like Rose comes into your life and teaches you that the greatest wealth isn't measured in money or control. It's measured in moments of genuine connection, in the courage to be vulnerable, in the simple act of seeing another person and saying, "I'm here. I see you. You matter." That's the story Richard would tell if anyone asked. Not about cameras or accidents or wheelchairs, but about love, real love, the kind that doesn't try to fix or control, but simply shows up and stays. The kind that says, different doesn't mean gone. Different can be powerful. Different can be beautiful. And in the end, that made all the difference. If this story touched your heart, if you believe that true compassion can change lives in ways we never expect, remember that we all have the power to be someone's Rose, to see people for who they truly are, to offer hope when fear seems overwhelming, to show up with kindness and presence, because that's what changes the world. Not money or technology or control, but human connection. Simple, profound, irreplaceable human connection. That's the greatest gift we can give, and the greatest wealth we'll ever know.